please leave it till the end or type your questions in the Zoom chat box. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Gao. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Dr. Chong, for your nice introduction. Also, thank you for Hong Kong Metropolitan University for the invitation and Winfrey, and it's great opportunity for me to be back and share my research. And I think I'm supposed to be back some years ago before what happened in the last few years. And my talk is actually quite closely related to what happened or what we experienced the last few years, because when you talk about when I start working on language teacher agency, is this the kind of experience we have been through in the last few years that prompted me to think about the need to look into the inner resources human beings have in response to challenging situations. So, although this topic is about language teacher agency in the multilingual world, it's more about raising awareness of the kind of inner resources we have in ourselves in response to challenging situations. So what I'm going to talk about is, first I will probably outline the kind of challenge or complexity of language teaching or teaching. We know teaching in any context a complex or challenging task or profession. So I will be trying to outline some of the challenges we have to respond to. And then I'll be looking at what as teacher agency, how does it work and how can we promote it? This is not just about English language teaching or language teaching, it probably applies to all professions. We are in a very difficult situations, and there's so many things going on, and some of us may be confused, or a lot of us may be unsure, or we may be unclear about what's going to happen in the future, or perplexed by the situations we have to respond to. And I think this probably captures the experiences many of us had in the last few years. And I was, like many of us, so I was once a bit disoriented and also bewildered by what had been happening. So if you ask about the kind of challenges or complexity of language teaching, we brainstorm, probably two things will pop up in our mind. This is first, this is to do with the complexity, but first thing will come up to our mind is that we have to deal with increasingly diverse classrooms, and student diversity comes in different ways. We talk about students having different linguistic cultural backgrounds in contexts like Hong Kong or Australia, but we may also talk about students of different levels of readiness for learning, or I think some of you may be familiar with the term neurodiversity. But because of the last few years, we also have to deal with students appears to be hyper sort of stressed by the situation they have to deal with when they come back to face-to-face on site. And yesterday I was talking to some colleagues here talking about student teachers going out for doing teaching practice, and some of them have felt stressed, and maybe it's because in the last few years we didn't have to deal with a complex human interaction face to face when they now have to deal with students in on-site classrooms, and they suddenly find it's very difficult to respond to situations. And because I used to work at Hong Kong University, I also was responsible for student teachers placement as well. So I know that Hong Kong students tend to be quite well-mannered, but I think the situation is becoming quite different these days because of what we had experienced the last few years. And the second thing we can, this is also to do with what we experienced last few years, is to do with technology developments. There was suddenly push for learning and teaching online. And then in the last few years, we had heard about this generative AI tools, and which seem to be threatening to language education programs. Or we have to now think about new values or the kind of values that we need to articulate for learning languages for our students. Otherwise, the kind of traditional way of teaching grammar or teaching vocabulary may, in comparison with the rise of the generative AI, may lose kind of appeal for many of us. I now want to sort of try to situate the complexity within a big ecology. So I want to go through, instead of referring to what happened the last few years, but I want to situate the complexity of language teaching or teaching in a broad ecological context, because that ecological context consists of multiple layers of contextual conditions. For instance, when we talk about the macro big contextual process and conditions, we can talk about the spring cultural traditions. There are some sort of a noticeably shifting cultural values may impact the way learning and teaching are traditionally done in classrooms. And for instance, the changing student-teacher relationship in certain contexts may have made teaching particularly challenging for teachers. And there's also geopolitical conditions, and there's also shifting values of languages. And in the past, we talked about the rise of Chinese as an international language in relation to the dominance of English as the global lingua franca. But we also have the demographical changes where people birth rates or people move to different parts of the world, and they are in need of learning different languages. And ideological conditions, and we now have been problematizing so-called monolingualism and think, well, because there's also perceptions that, for instance, bilinguals and perfect bilinguals need to speak two languages perfectly, but that's not the case, because we know that bilinguals language standards cannot be measured according to the monolingual standards. And so there's a lot of emphasis on multilingualism, prolingualism, and just this might have been challenging the dominance as English as global lingua franca. And also we need to talk about socio-economical conditions, and this is to do with what happened the last few years, but also it's ongoing. We have a growing wealth gap, and then we have people who can access to a lot of resources, but we also have people who have limited resources, and technology developments also somehow exacerbate the kind of equity issues. For instance, in ChatGPT, the generative AIs are particularly good at dealing with languages like English, but it's not really well, then they not really have good at dealing with languages that are less represented in the database, such as the any kind of a language of smaller size incomparable with English language. Technology development is can be seen as a kind of a blessing, but also can be seen as a threat. We now have a very dynamic, globally interconnected multilingual world, which means it's very easy for us to use the language to interact with people in different parts of the world. We also have tools that help us to interact with people without the need to learn the language. For instance, if I'm looking for someone in, say, Bangladesh or university, and the websites are in Bangladesh, so I don't speak Bangladesh. So what I need to do is just use the Google Translate in Chrome browser, and then I can translate that Bangladesh into English. So I don't need to learn Bangladesh. But does that mean that there's no value of learning languages? We probably need to look for new values and articulate these new values for learning languages. For instance, we know that bilinguals are more creative and they're more resilient than say monolingual people. I have to say, well, it's not really the problem with being monolingual. It's probably to do with the kind of brains being trained and developed by when dealing with multiple languages in our brain. So if we look for if we expect the world in the future to be challenging and sort of uncertain and difficult in some sense, we probably need to prepare graduates with high level resilience or high level creativity. They can think of solutions out of box in response to challenging complex situations. So learning languages will be a very good way for us to help our graduates to achieve that kind of level of resilience or creativity. And in a sense, we now need to highly more emphasize the integrative, intrinsic values of learning languages rather than traditionally we have emphasized learning languages for transactional purposes, for doing business or for information exchange, because these kind of transactional use of language could be dealt with by the use of increasingly sophisticated technology. But that creates kind of challenge for language teachers as well, because we need to adapt to learn or prepare our students for the kind of new values we articulate for the learning of languages. And then that macro changes, of course, affect what's going on at the middle level. And then you have this kind of institutional policies and practice how we value the kind of multilingual, multicultural resources that a context has. And for instance, in Hong Kong, we talk about being a multilingual, multicultural society or a community, and it has rich multilingual and multicultural resources that we can tap onto and to make Hong Kong much better places. There being a lot of policy changes in different contexts. And for instance, in the context of China, they're talking about reducing the weighting of English examination in national university entrance examination. And while they also put a lot of emphasis on the promotion of learning languages other than English, in Asian contexts, other contexts like Vietnam or even in Indonesia, they're talking about the right using English as a medium instruction. I think Jack probably will be talking about this in his talk. But then when we talk about these policy changes, it's very important for us to remember equity and access and persistent issues, because when you talk about using English as a medium instruction in countries like Vietnam, we inevitably have some people who are rich, they can benefit from the kind of use of English as medium instruction, while those who economically disadvantaged may not benefit from the use of English as medium instruction because they don't have the resources to improve their English, and so they can benefit from the use of English as medium instruction. And also the need, it's necessary for us to think about how we can preserve local language and local cultures. Hong Kong, for instance, Cantonese we have a rich Cantonese language and cultures. And if we talk about the other languages, we should also find ways to maintain these good local cultural traditions and practices. Coming to the classroom level, the immediate context, the language teacher has to respond to the kind of complex challenges in teaching. We talk about linguistically cultural diverse classrooms. It's easy to say, oh, we can try to use students' linguistic cultural resources for teaching, but if you teach a class with students of that speak 20 languages, it becomes a nightmare for many language teachers. But somehow they need to be prepared or facilitate or assisted in their endeavor to help these culturally and linguistically diverse students succeed in their academic studies. Yeah, I mean, it's always a big question or challenge for many language teachers whether students' linguistic and cultural diversity can be recognized as a resource or not a problem. And we know that students also have different aspirations. They want to achieve different things. And then increasingly with this technology development, students will come to language classrooms for probably quite different kind of aspirations. They probably want very rich cultural experiences instead of they want to learn the nitty-gritty of the language. And this is related to the kind of what's going on in second language acquisition research. And a group of people in 2016, they come up with this Douglas Fir group framework, trying to capture the complexity of multilingual world and what that means for second language acquisition researchers, so they can somehow reorient a different and synergize different perspectives in second language acquisition to come up with kind of a collective response to what's going on in the world, and how can we help language learners to achieve what they can achieve or want to achieve in the world. The figure appears to be quite complicated and probably not readable, but on the screen. But if you can find the Modern Language Journal and look for the Douglas Fir Group framework, you'll find the article. It just trying to capture a kind of complex ecology. Language learning takes place, and as a result, well, as language teachers, we also need to help language learners respond to the kind of a complex ecology in pursuing what they want to pursue. My reading of this Douglas Fir group framework for language teaching is that, well, first of all, I think the framework, well, in a sense, helps to affirm what we can do and overcome the kind of deficit discourses and the kind of things that we think a lot of things are problematic were problematic in the past. We need to rethink whether diversity is a problem or is a resource. And of course, and we now need to firmly believe that we can do something with the kind of a situation we find ourselves in. And of course, language learning and teaching always happen within a context. We need somehow adopt responses that are appropriate to specific context. Context does matter. And we also need to think about language learners when they learn languages, and they just not learn the language kind of a language system, but they also learn language they want to be heard and listened to. So their voice and the kind of meaning they want to articulate through using the language also very important considerations when we talk about teaching languages. And it also helps to see that teaching needs to be linguistically, culturally responsive. And hence, we need to talk about the kind of the pedagogy that draw on the kind of linguistic cultural resources that language learners bring to language classrooms. And probably, I think one of the speakers, the Hong Kong Metropolitan University invite is Professor Lee Wei. He talks about translanguaging. And it's also because in response to the kind of challenging situations, we also need teachers who are fully empowered agents, who are highly motivated, who have the kind of a knowledge, competence, and awareness, also who aspire to play the role that they expect to play in a new world. Hence, as I said, with the need to look for resources within language teachers, and that we need to recognize the language teachers as reflective and reflexive agents. And we need to value the agency in language teachers' professional development and sustaining design educational change and improve students' learning, because well, we all know that's never end to what we can do and what we can learn in relation to our professional practice. The argument, of course, is that we need to understand why teacher agents matters and how it works. I probably have to quickly go through some of the theoretical background of what is agency. And I used to do language learning autonomy as well, and I have to somehow differentiate the two concepts, agency versus autonomy. I will see autonomy is largely to do with individuals. It's to do with individual capacity to exercise control of their lives. And while agency is more to do with kind of socially, culturally mediated capacity to act, it means the kind of a, it's something to do with how we operate within in the community or within certain structural conditions. If I may somehow differentiate too, I would say agency as kind of root, while autonomy is the kind of expressions or phenomenon to do with the exercise of agency. And there are different ways to conceptualizing agency or teacher agency. I just want to quickly go through them. The four major theories or approaches, and you can see first as well, agency as an intentional act. This is according to social cognitive theory. And then probably a much more widely used conception of agency is to do with kind of a social cultural theory, which sees agency as a social culturally mediated capacity. And then you have a post-structuralist view, which I don't fully sort of endorse myself because I personally like the ecological perspective. But a post-structuralist view will regard agency as a discursive practice and to do with the kind of positioning you have, while the ecological perspective will look at agency as a kind of phenomenon and doing that something happening within a context and to do with our action. I probably just quickly go through these theoretical things because they're not particularly interesting. Social cognitive theory, we probably hear about. We still remember like famous psychologists and Bandura and talked about self-efficacy, and if we adopt social cognitive theory, we'll associate agency with kind of a efficacy and beliefs. Social cultural theory is, as I said, is probably one of the most widely used approach to conceptualizing agency, but it's to do with the kind of looking at human beings and working together. That's so-called intermental functioning, where our brains, like the brains here, we are all working together with kind of mediation means. Probably at the moment is my talk, but at other occasions could be to do with technology. Post-structural review is, as I said, is to do with kind of a positioning. Is kind of a it's the position you have enables to have the particular ways of doing things. As a speaker, or I position myself as a speaker here, I can do certain things, but as a view position as an audience, a member of audience, then you are also enabled to do particular things. The perspective I'd like to use is to do with ecological, well, is ecological perspective, which sees agency as a kind of a phenomenon, doing something happening and something that we do, and it's a kind of a what we call temporal, which is time situated, which is to the context achievement. So when we're trying to understand agency in different contexts and times, it really requires us to focus on the person's past experiences and past inferences and or traditions, kind of the person has been through, and then engagement with the present and orientation towards the future. So this sounds like a quite straightforward understanding of what's going on to do with agency when we're trying to understand agency works with the person. We know that teachers exercise agency for certain purposes, and we're seeing the kind of historically formed social, cultural, material circumstance contexts, and always constrained and resourced by these circumstances. So that the situation we are here could be a constraint, but also could be a resources for us. But why does agency or teacher agency matters? I think we sort of argue that teacher agency matters at different levels, and at the individual level and institution and national and society value. I shall elaborate a little bit more here. At individual level, it helps to help us continuously learning to teach, because we need, as I said, respond to a series of challenges. For instance, in case of student early career teachers, and the kind of quality of peer relationship matters for their sense of professional agency, and student-teacher relationship also matters. And I think that's why probably some of your student teachers complain about being overstressed about doing practice in schools. In case of in-service teachers, we're talking about the situation, like education reforms, the changes, what happens often feel like something we used to do or we are good at doing, is no longer valued, and we need to pick up new things. So that's probably the experiences or a feeling that many language teachers had over the last few years. And there's also rising regime accountability, and there's external standards that measure our performance. And that also draws our attention to the importance of relational agency, because teachers do not work by themselves, they work together. And sometimes they work together, they come up with new dynamics in response to the challenges I mentioned. And at the institution national level, but of course, teacher agency is critical in policy implementation, curriculum reform, whatever leadership or student leaders or national leaders have in mind in relation to education. They need to they need teachers to implement these ideas, and they are change agents, and also when the teachers implement these ideas in practice, and the teachers may experience conflicts between the value systems and values promoted by these education changes. And understandably, if the values, if teachers can see that the values promoted by education changes are somehow consistent with the kind of values they have, and then they're more likely to implement these reforms successfully. And if they don't, then they may contest the change implicitly, because teaching is like when close to the class, class door, and then it happens within the four walls. So they can contest the change implicitly and passively without making their contest being known to the person who proposed these changes. I think it's also important for education reforms to ensure that teachers feel that they return control of their professional practice if they think that the values are consistent with the kind of values promoted by education changes, and they feel more in control of their professional practice, and they're more likely to implement what they expect to implement. And in a sense, teachers, we cannot only see, teachers as policy implementer, and we also need to see that they change policy along the way. And the society level, I don't want to talk too much because it sounds too big, but it's important to see that we do not just pass on knowledge to students. We prepare our students to function and make positive impacts in their roles in the society, so that there's all, when we talk about equity or social issues in teaching, we do not trying to encourage teachers to start revolutions in classrooms, but they might be critically aware of something they do. For instance, if they implement technology, they need to be aware of that some students may have access to the technology, others, they don't have access to these kind of technology resources. So when they become aware of this kind of differences, different access the students may have, when they adopt a particular technology in teaching, and they can that ensure that all students have equal access to these kind of resources, and they are doing something to do with so-called social justice in teaching as well. Of course, in some contexts like Australia, teachers probably have to deal with issues like race or ethnicity in teaching. And that's why it's important for us to argue that reflexivity is also central element of the agency, and teachers need to think about constantly about what they have been doing and the kind of underlying assumption they have in relation to their pedagogical decisions, and whether the assumptions can be questioned, and they need to adopt a different kind of ideas in teaching. We all know there's also chronological time element in teacher agency as well. I just want to skip there because it means that at different career stages we may have to adopt different practice so we can constantly learn to teach. Just to try to sum up a few issues that language teachers may have to deal with. For instance, the the language in relation to exercise of agency, that teachers need exercise agency when we're working with students of diverse backgrounds. And in some contexts, like when we had talked about non-native English teachers, they may need exercise agency in navigating the kind of a so-called native speakerism ideology that dominates the profession. And we need to respond to the new curricula and some, for instance, in the last few years, we were expected to adopt pedagogy or related to technology, the use of technology. But luckily, the need to teach online has now disappeared. But it will be staying with us, I think, for some time. And language teachers also need to exercise agency in making career decisions or transitions in some contexts. I mean, this is one of the contexts, very bizarre, but it happened to a lot of people in some contexts like Vietnam, where they changed the language policy, and then in Vietnamese universities, some Russian teachers were suddenly asked to teach English. And in relation to many of us, we all have to be published in international journals because English is the dominant medium of international academic publishing, and this can go on. So how can we promote it? And the two ways we can promote it is, one is to change the contextual conditions. The other is to promote the actor's worth. And the contextual conditions could happen, well, at different levels, I mean, at a group or subgroups or at individuals. So, for instance, we can build up communities, teacher communities of different size. They kind of from schools, well, small groups to inter-school communities and different levels. I mean, and that will create kind of a safe and socially supported spaces for teachers to exercise agency. And it's better to involve the kind of bottom-up process. That in these groups or communities will involve the kind of activity like giving advice, seeking input, asking questions, sharing concerns or doubts, and that will somehow minimize the impact or negative impact of a top-down approach on their professional practice. We can't avoid a top-down approach because policies often made by the top, and they have very direct important impact on us, but we somehow need to take, basically minimize the negative impact and potentially negative impact and maximize the good thing that come with the top-down policy. The advice is that it is for these communities that they need somehow to do something to do relevant to teachers' work, and they need to be collaborative in nature and work for the benefit for all. And as teachers need to be trust and remain open to each other. And it's important for us to remember it's not natural. Things not naturally happen or social given. People need to work together to create and maintain these communities. And the second point strategy is to what we call promote the active growth. That's related to the kind of argument I put forward earlier that we need to overcome deficit discourse related to language teachers and learners. We for instance, we tend to position non-native speakers in the profession negatively. We also need to create kind of reflect space for critical engagement with teachers' own assumptions, and so they can adopt alternative or different kind of discourse, so they can position themselves as or language learners. For instance, we can encourage people not just publishing local international journals, but also writing papers for journals and or professional journals, or undertaking professional interactions. So the kind of a lot of now you have like blog posts or whatever online social media where people can encourage each other. And we can also encourage people, teachers, to adopt kind of what we call multimodal narratives, so they can use images to reflect on their prior experiences, assumptions. And we can also try to provide different discourses for the creation of space where they can sort of negotiate a more favorable professional identities in relation to their sense of agency. It's very important for us to talk about the collective because teacher agency is highly relational and social. That's why I talk about the importance of forming groups and communities. Basically, collective means 1 + 1 is more than 2. It's important for people to come together, that we can somehow have kind of shared beliefs of advocacy and pooled understandings and group aspiration and for collective action. Collective agency can involve collective actions of a group of teachers, but we need to be aware of kind of risks and threats to this kind of collective agency as well, because workplace is complex. We need to ensure that teachers are somehow connected at the individual level, both emotionally and intellectually. Because if we just talk about work and without the kind of a need to talk about our concerns, then or we're afraid of talk about our concerns openly, and then it'll be difficult for us to kind of build a trust and trustful relationship with each other. And also we need to make sure that teachers should somehow engage with in collective activities. Without this kind of collective activities, that they don't have time to come together, share ideas, and work together. And that's also an underlying factor to the kind of a collective agency operation. Well, basically, I think time is almost up, right? Okay. Teaching in a world that after the pandemic, well, it's still rewarding for sure, but it's complex and demanding, and sometimes we can say it's emotionally draining. I think 2 years ago, I was hoping that the life would be much better after the pandemic. Students, teachers, and because I had to deal with school education there, also dreamt like that. But after the restrictions were lifted, we found actually teaching become much more demanding. And I think probably it's during the pandemic, people were very kind to each other. And when the restrictions were lifted and the kind of reality sort of returned. So we found teaching becomes, or learning becomes much more complex and demanding, emotional and draining. But that's why I think it's really important for us to talk about the kind of teachers as agents, or we need to create opportunity to foster grow agency in teachers, because that's the kind of thing that will help us to respond to the challenging situations after what we have been through in the last few years. And so I really want to emphasize it's really important for us to work together as a groups or as a collective, rather than we're still doing the things our teaching happens within the classroom walls, and it's a long act. We somehow need to come together like we used to come together very closely during, even though we were sort of separate in our own units of flats because of restrictions in COVID years. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gao, for introducing to us the conceptualization of teacher agency, highlighting the importance of it and introducing to us the different ways of promoting teacher agency. So now I'm going to open the floor to the Zoom participants and also all participants here on site. So feel free to raise any questions.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm just wondering where you finished with the challenges. It's hard to know because we haven't had time to now research what has actually happened so readily. But I'm just wondering that my intuition is that the level of schooling has had an effect on the just how strong the impact has been for the challenge for students to come back into the classroom and to come back into our understanding of education. So I'm just wondering if you could comment if you're aware of differences depending on whether, I guess really from the teacher point of view, this is about teacher agency, having to help students who missed the last 2 years of high school versus students who missed, the first 2 years of primary versus students in the middle of university education. My sense is that the challenge has been a little bit different depending on which developmental years the students were yanked out of, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's not about the kind of learning loss that a lot of students suffered during the COVID years. I think there's a study last year in one of the Nature journals talking about the different levels of losses in of learning in literacy and numeracy in different countries. Like a lot of countries actually suffer a lot loss in student learning gains. In terms of student learning gains in different countries, regardless whether we're talking about developed countries or developing countries. And also because of separation from each other, and I think the students, many of you probably are aware, but there's also psychological issues as well. And when it comes to us all of a sudden come together, in my experiences, the students had high level of tensions for social interaction, feel stressed about interacting with people. And then I think in Hong Kong, probably in some other parts of China, where the kids suddenly had to go through exams again, they feel again super stressed by the exams pressure. So yeah, I mean, it's the kind of return to normal, normal pre-COVID normal take quite a few years. I think it will not be over. Just, I mean, it was difficult last year, and I think the difficulty associated with schooling will persist this year and probably in a few years. It's like when we talk about the international aviation industry, the Cathay Pacific would not just resume its normal operation, pre-COVID normal operation immediately. It would take a few years for the aviation industry to recover. Yeah, so we are dealing with a kind of a sort of a impact.
Okay, so thank you, Professor Gao, for your very inspiring talk. I really like the conclusion, teaching in a brave new world. I mean, I like the word brave. I mean, because like we are also like educating or cultivating Hong Kong like teachers for primary school and secondary school in our school, especially for languages teaching. So according to my understanding, quite a numbers of students, they got so kind of like nervous or anxious before they go to their first practicum. So the brave word just actually like give me something. I mean, maybe you can through like teacher agency to improve them, because like our students, to my understanding, they got very good training. But the problem here now is that like post-pandemic worlds, how can we like, since our teaching world is very complex, demanding, and also emotionally draining. So do you have any good idea on how can we reform or add something to the existing curriculum to better help our students prepare for the teaching practicum? Thank you.
Well, I was responding to the question because I'm now responsible for the professional experience at school education as well. And last year, one of the biggest challenge for our student teachers to go to teaching practice is that they just couldn't get up in time.
Same here, same here.
So the stress is getting up and going to school on time. And that generates so much stress for a lot of students, because before that, we could do a teaching practice online. So the literally can do the teaching practice in pajamas in bedroom. So I guess in response to the questions, I think we did really well during the COVID years. In a sense, we support each other. We were super nice to each other during the COVID years. And I think we probably have to be super nice to each other for a few more years, because really supporting each other in a sense, because it's once there's kind of perception where restrictions lifted or everything will be okay. And then we have the kind of a pre-COVID normal expectations that probably doesn't work well. But I mean, of course, I mean, we can't really the kind of well, responses to COVID situation will not last forever, but we have to be aware of that the situation was not normal. Even restrictions, it's not normal. It's not even restrictions are lifted. And also, I think it's been like before, we need to talk about teachers working together, create time and space for them to work together rather than throwing. I mean, I know teachers are overstressed and they have a very busy timetable, but in developing the table for our teachers, and it's important for school and principals or to think about whether they can build a kind of time for them to work together and share some concerns or discuss the needs and pressing needs in their workplace rather than just expect them to keep going. During the COVID years, there was a lot of emphasis on well-being and welfare. I think we need to sort of keep this kind of tradition as well that we established in the COVID years.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Andy, I agree with you that we have to be really nice to each other, especially when our academics and participants submit our manuscripts to your journals where you are the chief editors. Yeah, so we do have one question from the online participants. So I think Dr. Phoebe Siu from PolyU, thank you for your excellent insight share today. And so she would like you to share the perspectives on two issues. The first one being generative AI and teacher autonomy agency. And the second one being how would teacher agency and student agency interact in a language classroom?
Generative AI is something that we have to think about because that I was asked to respond to an article by Richard Kern in Modern Language Journal talking about the impact of generative AI on language education. I think Rick Kern talks about we need to articulate the value of language study to the public because I mean there's in many parts of the world I probably our university president would think, oh, language we don't need to learn languages because we have technology to solve all the problems. My response, of course, it's probably I have to back to the reason why we need to learn languages. I mean, we learn languages is for transactional information kind of exchange purposes, or we're trying to have a very enriched cultural life experiences and kind of intrinsic value. And I think in future probably people coming to the language classroom will be much more intrinsically motivated rather than the kind of driven by the need to learn language for transactional purposes. So there's also the need to look at how learning language would benefit us as human beings. And so there's a lot of studies talking about multilinguals or bilinguals and in relation to their resilience or creativity, or they can persevere better in challenging situations than monolinguals. And I think we need to kind of think about how language learning to do with the kind of people we want to have in this world, or the kind of graduates we need to have in this world. So I think we need to bring back the kind of humanistic value back to the learning language, because I think in the past we talked too much about learning language for certain kind of purposes. Teacher agency in technology, it's really a difficult topic. I know that a lot of teachers will see this as kind of threat, but we can also see that technology developments as a resources, because that will help us to somehow channel our energy to far more important missions to do with language education. maybe in the past we put too much on the teaching learning of grammar or vocabulary. I know the vocabulary is your area, so I'm not saying this is not important, but maybe that we can use technology to engage with using technology more effectively in helping students to learn, develop vocabulary, grammar. But the more time can be also released for other important things that they help them enjoy the kind of rich cultural experiences that come with the learning of language, and also become much more creative or much more resilient by doing the kind of tasks to do with learning of a language. And there's something we have to be aware of that, for instance, we know that autopiloting or automation can help us to drive cars and or even operate planes, but the pilots and drivers still need to have essential skills, right? And otherwise we won't get a license, or even we somehow in the future, maybe the government will be happy to give a license if we can show that we can operate computer system to drive the car. But we still need a kind of essential skills when things happens. That kind of skills that cannot be taken off. Otherwise, we won't be calling ourselves human beings. Because we not control these machines, we are actually dependent on the machines. So there's something we need to think about, that how learning language can help us to develop this kind of essential qualities or attributes that we can claim that we are still human beings, and we are on top of the machines, rather than we will become entirely dependent on machines.
Yeah, I think it's true that generative AI can actually very easily generate an essay with 100 vocabulary. So I should definitely think about my research direction. And so I see that.
But we still need get people who can write. I mean,
Yeah.
otherwise there's no general AI cannot don't have the kind of database to generate the things you wanted them to generate, right?
Absolutely, because that's when I tell my students that you can't just simply use ChatGPT when interacting with people on spot. Yeah, so I can see that Professor Lee has a question.
Thank you, Professor Gao, for the interesting talk. So I would just have a more like a formal questions in a formal linguistics way. So bilingualism is the first language and then second language. So in Hong Kong, the context is very complicated because the first language can be dialect, can be Cantonese, can be Mandarin, or some cases in the English. It seems that we cannot strive for absolute bilingualism. So in what way we're able to, in terms of teaching, we're able to minimize the interference of L1 to L2. So because somehow the students, they get a Chinglish or wherever in Singapore, they got this kind of interference. It seems that will grammar help, or the contrastive thing, or anything we can strive for more creativity in terms of their learning of L2.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that our first language is kind of interfering our use of second language, but alternatively, you can also see that with this kind of first language, different kind of first language, people are much more creative in using language. I think I can think of a lot of the shopping signs in Hong Kong. The creative use of both English and language, like I don't think about like GOD. GOD. Yeah, I mean, this is a very creative use of language, and I think we should encourage this kind of language. And I think in the future, we probably will be learning language for this kind of creative use of a language as well. I mean, because if you say, well, if you want to translate this into the things that like, you don't need to learn the language. You just use the Google translator and Chrome, and then you know the information. But if you want to come up with a kind of a shop signs like GOD, that requires kind of creative use of both languages. And it doesn't mean that person who come up with this kind of a idea has a very balanced English and Cantonese. Maybe this guy probably has better in Cantonese than English, but it helps this person come up with this very eye-catching, sharp, appealing shop sign. So I think it's so that the interference of first language I can see give this some person or people a clear advantage in using the language creatively.
Thank you for the example
Yeah.
of GOD. Actually, it is written Chinese and Cantonese.
Yeah.
And then there's a romanization over there.
It's actually very interesting to see all these brand names emerging. And so we have an online participant who actually want to interact with Professor Gao. So see if the person can turn on the mic and ask the question. No? Oh, okay. All right. In fact, we still have around 5 minutes, so maybe
Yeah.
we'll just simply ask this one last question. So, Professor Gao, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges or obstacles that teachers face in developing and exercising the agency in this multilingual world?
I think it's to do with the perception that teaching is a long act. And we all somehow teach and within the kind of closed classroom doors and within classroom walls. It's actually we can open up and we can interact with our colleagues. And I think also the schools institution need to create kind of space for people to come together. I think one of the good practice we had is during the COVID years is that we create this kind of virtual chat rooms during the COVID years. So people there's scheduled that people come and join and discuss and chat. And in my school, I think it has been a good practice. And once people can come together and share their issues and concerns, they may be able to work out solutions. As I said, when we talk about agency, it's important for us to remember the importance of collective agency, where 1 + 1 is better than or larger than 2. I can't really emphasize the need for the space and time that so people can come together and work together.
Thank you very much. And so I believe the online participant actually cannot turn on the mic. So maybe because we also cannot wait for his question. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact Professor Gao through email.
Yeah.
And so thank you very much. Now I think we will have we are really satisfied after this very inspiring sharing. So we'll have a tea break of 20 minutes and Professor Wang's talk will start at 11:05. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Professor Wang.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back. In the next hour, we are privileged to have Professor Melinda Wang delivering a talk on building the bridge from practice to theory, the importance of scholarship. Professor Wang is the director of the Center for Language Education at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. With over 25 years of experience in education, ranging from primary and secondary to tertiary levels, she brings a wealth of expertise to her work. Professor Wang's extensive teaching background has greatly influenced her pedagogical approach. She is dedicated to bridging the gap between the linguistic theories and language teaching practice, leading her to establish a new journal online called Scholarship of Teaching in Language Education. Please join me in welcoming Professor Wang. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to start my timer. Great. Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really pleased, and I feel humbled that you thought to invite me to your conference. It's really fantastic to be here. And I'm especially glad to be able to speak on this topic, which goes dear to my heart. In fact, my entire career professionally has been devoted to this topic. So I think that my background is probably quite typical in a lot of ways to a lot of people in this field. I was a trained teacher. I decided to see the world, and one way to see the world is to teach language because language is taught everywhere. And then I thought, well, I better get some proper qualification to back up what I've been doing just a little bit for fun, teaching and not very formally. And then that's where I met linguistics and second language acquisition. And I got completely caught up in it and did a master's and did a PhD. I think I'm really typical in that way. And then entered the role as an academic, as an applied linguist. For better or for worse, the linguistics that I found myself in and the linguistics I found myself excited by was very formal, generative Chomskyan linguistics, right? So my training was in this very formal approach to second language acquisition, but my identity was a teacher. So that's why my entire life has been trying to bridge this gap. And one of the earliest things I wrote was this book that you see the cover here, Language Teaching, Linguistic Theory and Practice. And what I want to do today is I want to share with you how after many, many, many years, I think finally I have a couple of useful ideas to share. Bridging the gap. I tried many different ways to bridge the gap when I first started, including impact initiatives, right? We all have to have impact. We set up some networks between Leeds and York mostly, where we invited school teachers in and we invited fellow teachers in, and we were trying to share the theory and trying to have the teachers interact with us so that we could, you know, for the better of all of us, move forward in language education. But every time we did it, I was left with a very uncomfortable feeling, to be perfectly honest. This is actually what I felt like when I did these activities. I felt like I've built this bridge. I know I'm just junior, and I know I'm not very good at bridge building, but they don't even seem to be walking across it as I had in mind. So on the one hand, I felt like, oh, I'm ticking all those boxes. I'm supposed to be doing impact. I'm supposed to be sharing the knowledge. But it was really clear to me that the teachers were very, very polite and actually seemed genuinely pleased that we were having these kinds of sessions. It wasn't really leading to where I wanted to go. And in fact, at some points, I almost thought, well, maybe the whole approach is wrong. Maybe I should build a boat instead. What's going on here? Throughout all of this, everything I'm trying to do is entirely well-meaning. The intention is entirely good. But in fact, those teachers who are willing to just be sort of honest and frank, a lot of them said things like, oh, very, very interesting, but you know, I have to teach tomorrow. Sort of the message is, what you've just told me and what I have to do tomorrow, yeah. So I've never given up, and I've always continued to try to bridge the gap. But one thing I've come to realize is that the bridging, I think, and one of the insights I want to try to convince you of this morning is that bridging the gap has often been unidirectional, has been coming from one side. That was one of the first realizations I had. And I have been trying to find ways to address this. And I think now it's only from actually working with teaching practitioners that I have finally realized, and this is what I want to share with you. So I've had the pleasure of being able to work within a language center for nearly 10 years now. Time flies, you get old quickly, right? For nearly 10 years, really moving from a very, just typical academic researcher into this more administrative position, which has given me incredible insights, and I think has given me an education that I couldn't have got otherwise. So the theme of this talk, or the argument of this talk, is that what we really need is we need to build from both directions. To me, I think if we don't do this, then we'll always be a bit stuck. There'll always be a limit to what we can achieve. This is what I want to convince you of. So to set the scene, language education is the context in which I'm speaking, but I suppose what I'm saying might apply to other domains. We're talking about two groups of people. We've got on the one hand, researchers, applied linguists. We've got on the other hand, practitioners, professional educators. These are two groups of people. As you can see from my slide, they could be seen as two teams. Yes, two teams. But I want to keep us focused on the idea that we all have shared interests. In abstract terms, we have absolutely the same intentions. We're interested in language development. We're interested in language learning. We can put some specific labels and some specific emphasis on this, like input, output, motivation strategies. We're all interested and we're all dedicated to these things. I don't think there's anyone in either team that would say, no, I don't care about that. Yeah, we have these shared interests. But in reality, from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., it's a very different reality. Very, very different in everyday terms. There are different pressures. There are different job descriptions. The contracts tend to be different. And different career paths. I said I was typical, but I'm a particular profile. A career path for a practitioner and a career path for an applied linguist is typically different with lots of variation, right? Within applied linguistics, the researcher team, there has been genuine concern over many, many years. Just before coming up on stage, Andy said, yeah, this is always an issue. This is always an issue. And I think all applied linguists very, very much resonate with this challenge. So I've put just two examples to show, for decades now, right? The issues that divide. Yeah. Changing values. What use? What's the use of those theories, right? And then a little bit more currently, I just like this quote of Andy Curtis because he's just being very, very right? So it's his holding up his hand and saying, let's take responsibility ourselves, right? One of the reasons for the disconnect is the tendency of professional academics to write for each other. Applied linguists write about language, classrooms writing for other applied linguists. So the reason I put this quote in is I don't think this is about anyone's fault or there's no bad intent anywhere. But there are a lot of pressures that are leading to this the context in which we operate. Penny more recently, theory and practice in the context of language teaching are not polar opposites, but points on a continuum. I like that. I like that. That's closer to now where I'm taking my thinking as well. In fact, I think a continuum view is a useful way to think about the many pressures that we have to face. So as applied linguists, as linguist educators doing research, we really want to have a positive effect on classroom teaching and learning. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't want to. That's why we're doing research. We want to have this positive effect. Yet at the same time, there's a lot of pressure to demonstrate impact. I know from firsthand
which is why we put on sessions that, to me, felt a little bit less than satisfying. We want to produce research that has new findings. Of course, that's what we're wanting to do. We're researchers. But there's also this pressure for citation statistics. Yeah, this pressure that this one big study I did might make me 4 publications instead of 1, right? The context in which we live is pushing us in that direction. We also really want to share knowledge. I've just realized this. I want to share this. The other end of the continuum is this notion of professionally developing others. And this is something that's really started to bother me over the years. And I'm going to come back to this towards the end of the talk. And hopefully by then it'll be clear why I'm feeling a little bit funny about that concept. In the other team, language practitioners, also pressures that can be seen on a continuum. We all want to keep current. We all want to know what the research is. We all want to know what's happening and what's the newest thinking. Everyone wants that. But at the same time, when we go to conferences and we read what's out there, there's a lot of it that feels like, this doesn't feel so relevant for my class of 22 at 9 a.m. and only 18 showed up. How many showed up this morning? Because it's 9 a.m. on a Friday, yeah? It doesn't feel all that relevant sometimes. Very, very nicely, Andy gave us a great talk about teacher agency. I should have been thinking more carefully to call it agency instead of autonomy here, right? And the importance of this, which then with the pressures can sometimes on the other end of the continuum, be that, leave me alone. That comment we made in the talk and talking about Andy's talk, that the reality is we close the door and we do our thing, yeah? One reason I love working with language education practitioners is that the devotion and the dedication to students is it's palpable. It's just what drives the people I work with. And I find that very inspiring. And everything, and as a theme in this talk, that practitioners do tends to be motivated by trying to be better for the students. The other end of the continuum is because it's the students that matter. How dare you also ask me to? There's no research in my contract. Some real tensions here. So to me, the way forward is to really focus on those shared interests, to really focus on the ultimate aims. However, in doing that, I think it's also equally, and maybe at this point, even more important, to recognize those differences, to recognize that the different teams, the different sets of people do have different expertise. And I feel like that's missing a little bit for us in our field. When I say our field, I mean both teams together. Language educators and language researchers are not the same people. It's just really, really obvious. But actually, if we accept that, we respect that, I think it leads to some profound differences. And so that's where my starting point for trying to figure out how to build this bridge. Of course, it's not just the 2 teams. There are many, many constituents involved in this complex context that we work in. Researchers, practitioners, students. I could have made this slide fuller. Policymakers, administrators like me. Yeah, there's lots and lots of people and lots of pressures involved. But my argument is what we really need is bi-directional discourse. My reading of the literature, my trying to stay on top of the field, my feeling is that a number of these constituents are represented and are speaking and contributing. But I see a bit of a blind spot in applied linguistics. I wrote a short little piece called The Blind Spot in Applied Linguistics, where I've said this. To me, that blind spot is the practitioner voice. I don't actually see the practitioner, him or herself, in the published literature very much. A lot of the student voice is coming out, focus groups, interviewing students, a lot of work towards even getting students to do some publication. But the practitioner voice, especially given how many practitioners we have and the place they hold in the context, I don't see a lot of the practitioner voice in published work, is what I'm saying. So this is what leads me to this idea that we need scholarship. So in the past couple of years, my main focus has been to argue for, to champion, to advocate this concept of scholarship as an activity in its own right. And one reason I feel that my job as an administrator is very satisfying is because it's put me in a position where I can try to influence this kind of thing at a center level that's having genuine impact on the lives of people I work with. Yeah. So that's the satisfying side of being an administrator. To me, it's by recognizing scholarship that we can really begin to address this challenge. We need to recognize it in its own, its own activity and have more of it in the public domain. So I need to first start off by explaining what I mean by its own activity. I always start with the definition of Schulman, who was capturing a movement that was coming out of the US at the time in the 1990s. And this is the definition that I see most widely published, that scholarship is exploration which is made public, peer-reviewed, and critiqued and exchanged with members of the professional community so they can in turn build on our work. And for the first few years of trying to promote this, I was really focusing on this. Yeah. The problem of teaching is you go in, you shut the door, yeah, you get on with it. It's quite a private thing. Scholarship primarily is something that is out there, it's public. It's not something that's private. And we do a lot of scholarship as practicing teachers, and we need to make sure that as we're doing it, we put it in some form that can be peer-reviewed, critiqued, because the whole point of being an intellectual and an academic is adding to the body of knowledge, right? But it took me a while to realize that I was missing the main point. And the main point is that scholarship is about teaching and learning. Scholarship is 100% oriented to the classroom, to students, to teaching, to learning. So a more simple definition is scholarship are those questions, those needs that arise when teaching. Those needs lead to attempts to address them. That's what teachers do all the time. When they do it in a way that's principled and systematic, that output is then scholarship. That's my definition of scholarship. And I do think the word attempt is important because in the classroom context, we don't have the luxury of researching something before we try it. We walk in, something we thought was good is failing right here, right in front of me. We've got to modify and try something. The next day, we have another chance, right? We need to keep attempting. Just to step back a minute, I am using the word practitioner here. And I think it's an important concept. To me, a practitioner is a teacher, but isn't more than a teacher in that a practitioner practices professionally. And I wanted to put this slide in because I want to say that my context here in my thinking is university level teaching. I also want to say clearly, I am not excluding other levels. I'm not excluding secondary or primary, but I want to say that my comments here are really about tertiary only because that's my experience and that's my context in which I'm working. And I don't want to make claims beyond what I feel confident I can argue for. So to me, at university level in language education, if we have practitioners, if we have teachers teaching academic language at university level, how can we do this if you yourself are not regularly engaged in academic activity? So this is the perspective I feel quite strongly about, that if you're operating at this level, we're teaching university kids, bright kids, yeah? That scary moment, have we all had it when you realize your students are smarter than you? Right? Really, some really bright kids. if we're working at university level, we should also, teaching language at university level, the genre, how can we do that unless we ourselves are operating at that level? To me, practitioners at university level, they have core responsibilities of teaching, which affect their identity and makes them in that teaching team versus the linguist team, applied linguist team. And usually, if they're on a teaching contract, research is not formally a part of the contract. Yeah, not like this is difference, right? Tenure track versus teaching track, right? However, practitioners do academic inquiry to support their teaching. I carefully chose this word, academic inquiry, because I don't want to define my definition with my own word, right? I don't know any competent, contributing language practitioner who's not doing academic inquiry as their career progresses, yeah? To me, we need a label instead of just saying this is something that those people do. To me, we need a label. Why? We need to capture the academic work that educators do. Otherwise, I think it's hard for it to have the status and the legitimacy that I think it needs. Why? We all know the importance of discourse. If we don't have a label for something, if we don't actually recognize something as something that exists, it's impossible to get the recognition, the social capital that is necessary in the community within which we work. And then a third reason, university level. How much higher can you go as a language educator? We are at the highest end. We teach at university level. If we aren't the ones who are innovating, if we aren't the ones who are positively contributing, who are taking risks, who are trying cool new things, then who is? Yeah. I think the whole teaching profession, very legitimately, constant feeling of overwork, not enough time, and it's because it's the human interaction. I can always do better for my students. There's no end to that. I can always do better, always. But I think if doing better in this moment, spending 1 more hour giving much more detailed feedback for this set of 20 students, valuable, but if I don't actually take the time to remain intellectually active and current and to do the things I need to do to remain academically stimulated, if I'm not actually trying new things, the students today are gaining 3 new concepts or 3 new points of feedback, but the students tomorrow are not benefiting because I haven't had the chance to keep myself current and to do what I need to do. So what label? Okay, it's obvious, scholarship. So scholarship, academic activity that informs teaching but isn't teaching itself. Scholarship does not equate exactly to research, and it includes activity that is not research. So for the third bullet point, for example, in my center and a lot of language centers, language is taught in smaller groups because you need that interaction, but it still has to be a course. So typically the person responsible for the course has written something that 5, 10, sometimes 35 different people are teaching. It is not just a random set of bullet points. It is a piece of scholarship. It is like a textbook. A good course has teacher's notes that says the reason we're doing this is because we know that engagement's crucial, that cites the literature so that teachers are aware of how what they're teaching connects into the research that we're doing. That is a piece of scholarship. It does not equate exactly to research, and that what I just described is totally not research. I want to focus, though, on this next bit on the relationship between scholarship and research to try to clarify what I'm suggesting. To do so, let's go to basics. Why do we do research? We want to understand something better. We want to make a positive contribution. What is it? It's got to be evidence-based, the old scientific method. There's a theoretical framework, right? We're all on the same page. Research is incremental. A good research question has focus. is very specific. We all know, either from supervising PhDs or doing them ourselves, that when you first start off your research question, yeah. And then you realize, actually, and even, 3 months before submission, no, I've got to revise that. It's very incremental. And by the end of it, it's contributing a piece, but a small piece of the puzzle. That's research. Please don't get me wrong. It's valuable. I have nothing against research, so please don't take it the wrong way. Incredibly valuable. But I had a light bulb moment a few years ago working with practitioners when I realized, oh, wait a minute. I was working with practitioners, but teaching on an MA, teaching second language acquisition, right? So I'm doing two things in the same day. And then I realized, well, wait, research is theory driven. Yeah, should be. It's research. Theory-driven research will lead to theory-oriented findings. We advance theory. Fine. No wonder whenever I'm trying to convey, what I'm saying isn't all that relevant for practice because that's not why I did the thing to begin with. Yeah? Light bulb moment for me. So if you're sitting there actively taking this in and thinking, oh, I've got a question for, because how about classroom research? Classroom research, right? It's situated in theory, doesn't usually test a theory directly, usually classroom research, right? We usually test input, output, hypothesis, implicit, explicit form, all these things. It's not testing the theory, we're testing effectiveness, right? We're testing the approach. So how about that? How about that? I agree. It's very, very useful. My observation is that even that, which is useful, can still be a bit abstract. It can still be a little bit stepped away because by definition, it's research where you have to control. You have to have variables. You have to have conditions that you have to make sure so that you can demonstrate something with validity. So that it can be, but also crucially, I would say, yeah, I would include this in my definition of scholarship. There's no problem there. And so what I'm working towards is a relationship where there is overlap. See your Venn diagram. Oh, I didn't do a slide with a Venn diagram. So yeah, some research is scholarship and research, fine. No problem, yeah? But crucially, the difference, and I would say most of scholarship is not that. It's not classroom research and shouldn't be. Doesn't need to be, I should say. Not shouldn't be, but doesn't need to be. Scholarship is by teachers, for teachers, for teaching, ultimately for students, yeah? To me, another step in the fundamental difference light bulb was, wait a minute, who's asking the questions? And a realization that who is asking the questions very much shapes what those questions end up being. When teachers ask the questions, very different things happen. I want to share with you a wonderful experience I had that helped move me to this realization. I worked with a group of teachers just before I came to Hong Kong to put a volume together called What is Good Academic Writing? Insights into Discipline-Specific Student Writing. And what I learned from this exercise is what happens when the motivation for doing the research is actually teaching and learning. What I learned is what happens when teachers ask the questions. I've also put on this slide a 2024 recently published, not even sure you can buy it yet, volume that came out of Hong Kong. And this is another example of all practitioners doing scholarship, another edited volume, edited by Lillian Wong over at HKU, that came out of a UGC-funded project that allowed teachers to come together and to do some scholarship work and to share it, yeah? I'm focusing on my experience because you have to invite Lillian to ask about how that went, yeah? Examples of practitioner-framed scholarship, even the question, what is good academic writing? You won't be surprised to know the way this came about was a bunch of us teachers sitting in the room, marking against deadlines, and a conversation that got struck up. Oh, wait, what's good, right? This is good, right? this is good writing here. Is this good writing? But wait, what's good writing in media studies compared to history, compared to physics? And a realization that we weren't entirely sure. So we went out, oh yeah, there's lots of smart people, lots of researchers doing research in a genre. We know the differences, but we don't know all those differences. And there are a lot of gaps, is what that was the conclusion. And so we said, well, why don't we find out ourselves? What happened was a volume that had each chapter taking an incredibly different orientation to what I had conceptualized when I first started this project, because I had a very traditional theory-driven research model in my head. But because we inspired and allowed and encouraged the teachers to each take the question where they wanted to, we ended up with some really, really interesting, very different sorts of pieces of work. I'm going to tell you about the first one in design. What is clarity? What makes writing clear? Initially, she's working in a school of design. What's academic writing in design? I have no idea. Yeah? How would I know that? To find out, because she's wanting to help her students, she took a good piece of writing, good, it got an A, and a less good, it didn't get an A. And she asked, I can't remember how many, a few, 4 or 5 faculty to mark it, to put comments, so that she could then analyze and see, right? Very reasonable thing to do. And then she went and she spoke to them and she said, okay, why is this good? Why is this not? Why you said this is good. Why is this good? And what this passage you say isn't good. Why? And she got over and over and over. They said, it's not clear. It's not clear. And actually I think, oh yeah. When I mark essays, I write that too, right? Do you, when you're marking it? It's not clear. It's not clear, right? I forget to say it's clear, but I often say it's not clear, right? She came to me. She thinks, I'm the director. I have a professor, I have a PhD. She says, yeah, clear. What's the research on clarity? In applied linguistics, yeah. What's the definition of clear? How do we know? How anybody? What's the research? I don't know. I don't know of any. Go and look. She couldn't find any. I couldn't find any. Very interesting. Why does she want to know this? It's coming up all the time. The students need it, but we couldn't find it. Yeah. So she takes a stab at it. But what can she do? There's a limit to what she can do. But she raises this problem that we could use some more work here. Each chapter took a very different approach, and lots of different ideas came out of this. This is Bloomsbury. So, we did this properly. It needs to be rigorous. Each chapter, I sent them out for 2 peer reviewers, right? Please have a go and look at these chapters. I want to share with you a typical response. Please read. I honestly don't remember which chapter it was, but it kind of doesn't matter, right? It's probably better. And I won't tell you who this was. If I mentioned her name, you would all go, ah. Yeah, it's someone we know. It's someone really, really well-known in our field. So it looks like, oh, okay, sorry, we can't publish this, right? Please read. Yeah, this is one of my earliest indications of, oh, wait, there's something different going on here. And I actually spoke to her and I said, look, your first comment makes it sound like, I shouldn't publish, we shouldn't publish stuff if it's not rigorous, if it's not. But your second comment, she said, oh, no, you've got to publish it. I learned so much. Yeah, I'm really tempted to tell you who it is, but that would just be really breach, right? Breach. Yeah. And she said, no, it's fascinating. And I was just left with so many questions and things I want to think about now. So definitely we should publish that, right? Yeah, kind of interesting. The difference here, what makes good writing, is the point of view. A student has a very different need when they say, I want to be a good writer, right? Very different need from our favorite subject specialist, right? Who has an idea of what's good writing versus our favorite applied linguist. versus our practitioner who wants to be able to teach it very well. Yeah. So the practitioner is not doing text analysis for text analysis' sake, not trying to advance genre theory, though they might find something that's very useful, right? But that's not why they're doing it. They're not trying to explore the limits of methodologies, which is also very important in the research world. That's not why they're doing it. They're trying to do it for this much more specific motivation of students in teaching and learning. This project led to quite a lot of interesting questions, and I've since gone back now that I'm seeing it this way. At the moment when I was working in it, I wasn't quite seeing how this was what was happening, but I've since gone back. And through the volume, these are the kinds of questions that have come out. Does a good mark mean good writing? My intuition, right? But do we have research on this? Does a good mark mean good writing? Yeah. Generalizations. What do we do when we teach? We have to teach generalizations because where else, where are we going to start? But how far do generalizations take a novice writer? How far can they take? And which generalizations are useful? And I think these two questions now have just become even more important and interesting because of generative AI, right? What does generative AI do? It does patterns. It does generalizations. It cannot take it to that next level, right? But now, in the coffee break, of course, everyone's talking about generative AI, right? We're talking about how when we move to word processing, it upped the game because typos totally unacceptable now. Typo, are you joking? The thing will fix it for you, right? So it just raises my optimistic view is that that's what generative AI is going to do for us now. It's another revolutionary raising, right? Generalizations can take that novice writer, generative AI, throw it in, it will do that core basic, this is the formulaic thing to do, right? How far will it take? So I think it'll take you as far as generative AI will. But then we need that expertise. We need the understanding, the analysis of the context, right? Where does language end and argumentation or knowledge of content begin? Oof, big one, right? Huge challenge when you're teaching language. Oh, you just fixed the language, right? So, all of our practitioners are teaching the language to make sure that when they go to marketing and they turn in their marketing assignment, the marketing professor's happy. This one's got to make sure that the chemistry professor's happy, yeah? But can you really pull apart language from idea? How can you do that? No, and the marketing person says, no, don't comment on the idea. Just fix the language. How can you fix language if you're not engaging with the idea? Because the fix has to do with what you're trying to say, and it's quite messy, right? A lot more research in this area would be very, very welcome. How do subject specialists understand the marking criteria they use? Do they understand, do they consider student understanding? What's the practitioner's understanding? So these are some of the things that were coming out of the work that was done. And then the last one, the clarity one. So summary so far. Bi-directional discourse is what I think is needed. In order to do this, I think we need to recognize the difference between scholarship and research. And I've come to more and more think this is important. When I think about, I can't think of a better word than this, but the baggage that's connected with research. If you're on a research contract, in the research context in which we live, there's RAE, there are metrics, there's citation, which is driving a lot of things that I'm not going to talk about here, not my place, but not very helpful for what I'm trying to promote with this scholarship idea. So I've been working very hard to try to encourage my practitioners to not be claiming to do research. If they're claiming to do research, there is a very clear, rigorous definition of research that they might be doing, but isn't in their contract and isn't realistically what I'm asking them to do. I'm asking them to be scholarly and to take a scholarship approach. My concern is if we try to make it research, and then what if I get my university to agree that there should be research, a certain amount of research in my practitioner's contract? suddenly the expectation is going to be something that's, I don't want to do, I think that would be very detrimental to our center. That's going to take it to a different level. Back to the two teams. These are two sets of people. And I don't think we should be putting the expectation for set A, team A on team B. I don't think that will get us where we need to be. Though people who want to do research are, there's the Venn diagram, scholarly research, absolutely nothing wrong with it. But I think that the target is not accepting and respecting that we're talking about two different groups of people here. Full respect for scholarship as distinct activity, work of value as academic endeavor, and more outlets. So I just have, looking at my timing, I'm just going to say a very quick word about number 2 and then say a little bit more about number 3. So it's number 2 that takes me back to the point I mentioned earlier. Academic exploration, scholarship. It's not training, and it's not CPD. It started to bother me a little bit, and it took me a while to realize why, until I came to this position that I'm trying to share with you today. Working in the context of language centers and practitioners, everything is couched as CPD. CPD is important. Everybody needs it. We all had to do that workshop on Zoom. We all had to learn how to do the Zoom thing, right? When the pandemic came. That's CPD. But when I try something in my classroom and I do it rigorously, principled means I do it because it's coming out of what the research is telling me. I do it because the framework I'm working in says, this is how we're trying to approach our teaching and learning, right? And so it's principled. And it's systematic. I don't just randomly do it. In order to see if it worked, I have to do something to see if, measure something at the end to see if it worked, right? So that's what I mean by principled and systematic. And then I come to some conclusion. It's not scholarship yet because I haven't shared it. It isn't public. So instead, I put my hand up and say, in our weekly series on a Friday when no one has teaching, intentionally so that we can share, I want to share what I did and what I found. That's becoming scholarship. When I do this, I have certainly led to my own development, but it's not CPD. It would be like saying the English department has its invited research talk series. Imagine if the English department, oh, that's not English, physics. Imagine if the physics department called it CPD. Yeah. Everyone, please come along to our weekly CPD. No, but of course, the research you do also leads to your own development. That's the whole point of research. You're understanding better, right? So to me, it's this kind of thing that isn't properly respecting and recognizing the expertise that practitioners have. And if we don't recognize it to begin with, how can we then ask people to build on it or to do something with it? Yeah. So I've become a little bit anti-CPD as a concept. Recently, though, someone in my center said, but every time I saw the word CPD, I crossed it out and sent it back. No, we're going to call it the scholarship series. And then recently, some brave member of my team said, but I think this one is CPD. Oh, yeah, that one is CPD. So I am allowing people to use the label CPD now. But it has to be CPD. It has to be training, right? Like we recently had a thing, getting better at Excel, so that Excel could help us with our end of semester marking and manipulating. That's definitely CPD, right? Okay. Outlets. So if it's going to be bi-directional, we need to have places for publication. So there are a number of journals that are practitioner-oriented, shall we say. And I want to thank, especially Ben Morehouse. I had a meeting of Paul last week and was able to give a version of this talk. And Ben helpfully gave me this lovely list of practitioner journals. But not just practitioner journals, but within them, there are some categories that are really inviting more the practitioner voice. So there are some out there. There are also some resource banks I didn't put a big list, but you know what I'm talking about, where you can go, you can download materials and that kind of thing, which is a form of making public, right? And then there's magazines. I didn't know this one, The Modern English Teacher. This was a new one for me that Ben put me onto. There are some magazines, and I think earlier was mentioned blogs. There are all sorts of form. But I feel like there isn't enough out there that's by practitioners, for practitioners. So I am, again, just like I'm not against research, let me just say it again, I'm not against it, I'm not against it. I'm not against it, and I'm really happy that journals are opening doors like this, and I want them to do more and more and more and more. But I feel like there's space for defining a new genre of output and publication type that's by practitioners, and instead of trying to square the circle and make the practitioner voice feel comfortable in a different domain, right? So in addition. So I want to introduce to you a brand new platform, and I avoid the J word, platform, because I'm just trying to make this distinction, called Style. I'm very proud of this title. Scholarship of Teaching and Language Education, that exists thanks to the wonderful UGC on camera, wonderful UGC, thank you, who funded this, yeah, to allow a number of us to come together to conceptualize, to think about it. And what was really fun putting this thing together was really trying to interrogate, and a lot of what I'm saying today came because of the small project group that spent hours and hours trying to think about what we're trying to create here. So it's a new outlet for scholarship. Please do have a look. These are the categories. You can submit research. See, I'm not, you can submit some research. However, if it's not directly related to teaching and learning, if it doesn't have, then we will invite you to take it to the many different places you can put it, right? It's reviews and reflection that we're hoping will start to allow that practitioner voice. What I'm hoping to receive as a current editor in this volume, I would love it if some practitioner would take some really well-known theory, the Douglas Fir framework, right? I don't care which one, processing instruction. It doesn't really matter. Take one and then bring it back to us through the eyes of a practitioner, right? Wouldn't that be really interesting? Because the practitioner would say, yeah, this, not to challenge it, no, but this is really useful. But from what I still can't get, what I can't bring into my classroom because it still needs work, right? Wouldn't it be interesting if practitioners could do that kind of commenting? Or to say, look, I tried this in my classroom, but this is what happened and this is what didn't happen. A forum so we could have that bi-directional discourse. So review is taking review to another level, right? Of course, review books, review technology, especially technology from a practitioner. So this practical point of view, I don't need to say anything about that because you can imagine what that would be like. But I'd like to see this idea of reviewing concept. I think it would be really interesting. Or reviewing theories, just putting that practitioner voice onto something. Reflection is where I'm hoping we'll get more and more examples of this, I can't see my definition in my own head, my principled and systematic attempt and what happened, whether it worked or didn't work and why it worked and what didn't work. A place where people can then share that beyond just the sharing that takes place within centers. Because I know within centers that happens all the time, but a place where we could then share across, right, and learn from each other. It also has a section of actual teaching resources, plug and play. So in order to be accepted as a plug and play, it has to be clearly an example of something that we would understand to be supported by scholarship. But the idea for this is that you would just, a teacher could say, yeah, I'm going to use that tomorrow because I'm teaching this concept tomorrow. So it's actually it's a student material. In order to qualify, it has to be multimodal. It cannot be a worksheet. It cannot be something because there's too many outlets for that. So what makes this for practitioner by practitioners? What we are trying to do is create something that we think practitioners would want to engage with. So it's a multimodal platform. We encourage every submission to do a verbal 30-second or less abstract. This is what it's about because we think our teachers will listen. Nope, don't care. That's good enough for me. It's just a verbal abstract. We are encouraging multimodal submissions. So we have a really nice one early on in Gen AI of somebody showing how Gen AI works. And when you put the chat box in at the time, yeah, that was fantastic. So we could see that, and not just writing about it, we could see it. So it's video and text. So it's multimodal, and as appropriate for Hong Kong, it very much welcomes English or Chinese, and in principle, any language, but we have to be able to find somebody who can review it, right, and check it. Yeah. We spent quite a lot of time trying to decide how to manage the review process. We've come up with 4 criteria that we think can be imposed no matter what comes in. And that's why the or. Innovation or impact. Teaching, honestly, how often do you do something that's totally original and new? But if it's something that is very useful, that other teachers would say, yeah, thanks, good point. Yeah, or, oh, I could really use that, innovation or impact. It's got to be scholarship. It has to be grounded in the literature. It can't just be random stuff, right? It can't just be, oh, this is what I woke up thinking about. It's got to be grounded. And then presentation, and then a little bit of space here, right? So thank you for letting me share. I do hope that you will look up style, promote, and or perhaps contribute yourself. But mostly, I hope that I've convinced you that we really need to have this bridge that's going in both directions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mo. I am really impressed by your presentation, and I think you should definitely visit our university more often, because our university has been promoting quality education and also recently scholarship of teaching and learning. And I can see that for style, your editorial board members are usually practitioners and some are researchers. So it's very nice for us to have a platform to express our ideas about teaching and learning. So I'll just open the floor to.
I have the mic. I'm sorry. I totally agree with you, and I love style. It's the first time that I heard of it. I'm no longer a young academic. When I was a young academic, I was told that as long as you're good at 2 out of 3 things, the holy trinity of a faculty, teaching, research, and service. So a lot of people got promoted because of the 3 things they're good at 2 of them. A lot of not so big name universities, you obviously cannot get promoted in Cambridge or Harvard. But nowadays, the problem, I'm so sorry that our boss is not here. Nowadays, because of the ranking game, for administrators, we're becoming bean counters. We count papers in Scopus because that's the ranking game would look at, and also the citations. So how are we going to convince? I'm already convinced because I'm part of this myself, but most administrators are not like Reggie. I'm sorry to say. So how are we going to do this?
Thank you.
Start this revolution so that we can come back to the basic. I think your style idea is what we need, not the QS or time thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question, because I think the answer is easier than you might think. And I will tell you from my own experience, by recognizing the concept and the activity and naming it and saying, not just it's okay, but please do it. It doesn't necessarily require more than that. I'm a little bit nervous because this is Zoom and recorded, and I don't know how many people or who's listening to me. And probably my own center might be listening to me, but I will tell you, and you can check it with them, right? You can check it with them. Since I became the director there, I did not make any change in policy about teaching work allocation and how many hours you have to teach. But what I did say is, in our workload model, you also have 2 units. Our model's based on 20. It's UST, everything's quantified. Our model's based on 20. You have 2 units for scholarship, 18 for teaching. 18 is kind of a common, I think teachers in the room can associate with the concept of 18, right? 18 teaching, but those 2 are scholarship. I didn't change. I didn't make, it wasn't that it was 21 before and now it's 18. It was 18, but I said the two are scholarship. And that gave people the expectation, but also the permission to say, no, I'm not answering this email right now because I'm going to spend 2 out of 18. I'm going to spend some time now doing this more scholarly stuff. So it just gave permission. And those people who were already doing it themselves were thrilled because it gave, but then it allowed people who thought, no, I can't, because the students. No, it just, yeah. So administratively, there was no change. Sure.
The reality for young academics now, if you're a very good teacher, the best in your university, for some university, you can only go up to band 5. In order to go to the other side, band 6, 7, 8, and 9, they do need to count. So what should they do? For me, I don't have to worry about my career because it's winding down. But for people, well, I started teaching in 85, before you guys are born. So what should they do if they're stuck at a certain level? And in a year or 2, they don't have the energy to fight for those people anymore.
Yeah.
What can they do?
Yeah, you're right. And I think this is, we just step by step, right? So recognizing first and legitimizing the activity will go a long way, right? But I think the thing that I see starting to come in is this idea, again, labeling professor of practice versus, and I can see a few places are starting to take that approach. And I think that's a very worthy approach that will help. So that would be my most concrete answer. I think the other thing is that there's a degree to which it's okay. Well, how can I say this? It's okay. The other reason I'm trying to say, I call it the R word instead of, that we're doing scholarship, is I think it's by not recognizing we're asking an apple to be an orange. And apples are not oranges. And let me see, how can I get there in a different way? Assistant professors are not associate professors. Associate professors are not full professors. It's just the reality that we work in a sort of a structured hierarchical domain, right? And I think it would be a bit, you would say, well, what are you suggesting here if I said that, I don't know, a medical doctor should be paid the same as a lawyer? They're different domains. And so I don't think it necessarily has to be. But if we had the genuine respect and opportunity in that career path, I just don't think that the career path itself has been given enough definition, recognition, value. And I think if it was valued, if people wanted to become professors and do that, then there's a different career path for that. But I think it's just focusing on that one and recognizing it more instead of trying to make it like the other. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I get all these values and attitudes and reflection are actually also what our university is promoting. And that's why the senior management colleagues are indeed recommending every one of us to work on teaching portfolios for reflection. Right. So we actually have 2 questions online. So maybe I'll just simply ask you one by one. The first one is, how would student researcher and student teacher be included in your emergent pathways of scholarship?
Student researcher, yeah. Well, very much welcome. I suppose the question is student researcher heading in which of the two directions outlined. So a student researcher who's wanting to become an academic, I would think of and nurture and sort of try to guide quite differently from a student teacher who wants to be a scholastic practitioner. Yeah, so I would really want to ask that. And in fact, a lot of conversations I have with people, young career, or, well, wait, what's your aspiration? Because some people come through the practitioner route to become researchers, to go tenure, but a lot don't. A lot never want that. I want to be a language, and that's a very important piece of information, right? To think about where that person's going next.
Right. Then the second question would be, teachers in primary school and secondary school education are always worried about time and workload for engaging in scholarship. I think that's just the same case for lecturers, senior lecturers, assistant professors, all sorts of academics. Any applications may support to the teachers around for process ontological approach to start their disciplinary practice and scholarship in your new project?
Do you know, my answer to because this is always what I get, because it's true, time, and you're right. But I'm a little bit worried. I don't have the secondary, primary, especially here in Hong Kong, so I can't claim anything there about knowledge. But my answer is always mindset. I think it's mindset that really matters. And if I have time to give this answer, my illustration is one of the big effects that COVID had on me, the pandemic had on me, is that I physically started to become incredibly, I was in pain a lot muscularly. And I thought, oh, I did yoga years ago. I really should start doing yoga again. But it took a while to make me start doing it, even though I was physically in pain. The motivation to actually start doing it by the end of the pandemic, and all the gyms are closed, I can't do it. So I can't do yoga, gyms are closed, I can't do yoga. But eventually, as soon as I did yoga, and the effect was unbelievable, then everything opened up, and I just realized the more yoga I did, the more slowly I started doing more and more, and it's now a daily practice. I feel like a little bit of a yoga freak, right? Because it's just really helping, but it's a mindset. And somehow I am a rather busy person, but I still manage to get yoga in because it's a part of my mindset and it's a part of my daily understanding of what's important. And if part of your daily understanding of your approach to your job requires academic inquiry, then what you'll find is when you're doing something, you think, oh, wait, gosh, I don't know what the research is on this. I bet it's changed. You're just going to find yourself looking and doing it. So I just say, focus on the mindset and just see what happens. That's what I would say.
I'm sure Professor Ricky Kwok from our university would also agree with you, because in his sharing, he talked a lot about growth mindset in the learning and teaching week as well. So time is running out. So just want to see if we have got one or two more questions. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure a lot of the participants here would like to interact with you later on for further discussion. So while Steve Jobs famously encouraged us to stay hungry and stay foolish, I believe we have gained lots of wisdom from the insightful talks delivered by two of our speakers today. And we all want to indulge in a well-deserved meal. And we'll now break for lunch, which is scheduled to last approximately an hour and a half. So please make sure you return before 1:30 p.m. as there are more inspiring talks and discussion to come. Thank you very much.